Today, we're going to talk about this color, which is called Shadow White. But as you can probably tell, it isn't very white at all, at least to me. That being said, it is a beautiful rich color by Farrow and Ball that I want to get into and also show you some other coordinating paint colors that go with it in case you want to put together a color palette for your home. Whether you use Farrow and Ball paint or not, all of these colors can be custom matched at your local paint store. So don't feel left out if you're a Benjamin Moore fan or a Sherwin-Williams fan. You can get these colors, don't worry. Shadow White is also known as number 282. And the way that I like to assess it is it's a color that maybe looked white 100 years ago, but has now weathered and is starting to really show its age. Farrow and Ball paint is often synonymous with restoration of classical and traditional architecture. So you will find a lot of really beautiful and diverse versions of the paint colors we know and love today. So what kind of color is Shadow White? Because it's not quite a shadow, it's not quite white. The company describes it as a soft white with a hint of gray, and you can definitely see the gray in it. Although I would argue that there's a little more than a hint of it. There's quite a bit of gray here. One way we can determine how light or white a paint color is by looking at its LRV, or its light reflectance value. And normally, the paint company would display this information for you to digest. But unfortunately, Farrow and Ball doesn't really do that. So based on my estimation, I would say that Shadow White is a little closer to a 68 LRV. That means that from 0 to 100, Shadow White only reflects about 68% of the light that hits it. And this is compared to really bright white paints that maybe are in the low 90s. So that's a big difference. They weren't kidding when they added shadow to this color's name, which also helps describe it in a different way. Even if you look at a white room, like a room that's painted white, the shadowy corners will appear quite a bit darker, similar to this color. So I guess there is a method to the naming madness here. It does have some noticeable warmth to it, which helps with its versatility. I almost see it as kind of a taupey off-white, which sounds a bit weird because taupe is normally really rich and dark, but you get almost a warm gray that doesn't have much yellow showing through in practicality. Even though it's not nearly as light as a pure white, I could see it being used in similar ways because it works great on walls with its neutral feel. It really is one of those neutral canvas types of colors, but I also like it as a darker trim color too, or even on doors, largely because it does have that light gray base with that little bit of warmth mixed in too. Let's get right into some coordinating paint colors, and that's what's great about Farrow and Ball is they do have their own suggestions on their website that you can follow, which is great if you don't like my suggestions. So let's start with the complementary white that the company recommends, which is Schoolhouse White, which makes sense as they do share similar undertones and have a similar feel, but I didn't necessarily like how close they were, so I took things into a different direction with my pairing. I preferred Weave It because it feels even more complementary and almost pronounces that warmth in Shadow White just a little bit more. You would think that Weave It is composed of the exact same colors as Shadow White, being described as a delicate white with a hint of gray. Sounds familiar, but I think it has more to do with a light gray mixed with a touch of reddish brown. And if you don't know me already, welcome. I like to make up color categories to explain things quickly and efficiently. And Weave It is a light rouge to me, okay? Rouge is a gray rouge, a reddish gray. It takes the pretty straightforward Shadow White and just adds a little bit of excitement because you have that tiny bit of red in Weave It working against, or I guess complementing, the almost perceived green undertone in Shadow White, which are complementary color hues. The next color pairing does something similar, but in a slightly different way. It's called Blackened, and it almost seems like a gray tint that has been lightened with white, or more accurately, a white paint that has been blackened. It's composed as a pretty middle-of-the-road gray color, but in actuality, it will feel a little cooler. This is especially the case when you have it next to Shadow White. We're not so much playing with complementary undertones here. It's more of a straightforward contrast of color temperature, because there's not much warmth at all to be seen in Blackened. Now next up, if you thought Shadow White was pretty dark for a white, wait till you see our next color pairing, Hardwick White. The only way you could even perceive this color as being light in the slightest is by putting it next to the deepest black paint you could find. The reason I like Hardwick White as a coordinating color is because it essentially feels like a deepened version of Shadow White. They both tell the same sort of narrative, a feeling like a more traditional approach to white, or even an aged white. They both have that little bit of warmth to settle them a little bit, and depending on the lighting and the decor, Hardwick White can also have that slight perceived green undertone, but in other situations can just feel closer to a true taupe. This and Shadow White feel like the more seamless pairing of the bunch, and it could be a great choice as a subtle accent wall color should you decide to do that. Or even an accent ceiling color if you want to get a little fancier. But always remember to really think about whether you want to paint your ceiling a dark color, because if you ever want to go back to white, you're going to have to give it at least a couple coats. So just be mindful of future you doing all painting. I guess it's good for your back muscles though, right? Our final coordinating color is the accent of the bunch, because we were talking a lot about neutrals, so I wanted to spice things up at the end. It's the ever familiar deep, rich red that is somewhere between a barn and a raspberry. It's called Incarnadine, and it is just that pop of rich crimson that takes this palette to another level. This will likely be represented as an extra bit of seasoning on an otherwise neutral palette. But don't be afraid to paint an entire room with this, because it does have that timeless appeal that never seems to go out of style. See you next time.